Everything that I talk about in all these videos, I've lived. This whole idea about wasting your life, in some ways, when I look back at my own life at 18 or 19, or when I first started getting into philosophy and asking questions, I mean, I really was, when I went to prep school, I won a scholarship to prep school, I was a very, very shallow person. You know, I remember telling one of these, Mr. Armstrong, one of the English teachers there, that I didn't believe in inner meaning in books. He said, "No, I have to disagree with you." I mean, you know, what an idiot thing to say. I was 17 years old. But by the age of 18 or 19, I was, you know, frankly, I think a little marijuana had something to do with it, and LSD. But I was really deeply into asking all these questions. But I think deep down inside, what it was is I realized just how easy it would be to waste my life. And I was, you know, and I was very much affected by the zeitgeist of that time when everybody was, I don't want to end up with a 3.2 children and a white picket fence with a 3-year-old car that's still not paid for, you know. And I saw my father and how hard he'd worked and everything, what he really had to show for it. And I said, I don't want that life. And how many older people just seem to be riddled with regrets. So what do? You know, how do you live a life where you can be guaranteed that you're going to look back and say, you know, I done good. I done good. I would give him the same advice that Henry David Thoreau gave, you know, to himself, because he said he went out to live on Walden Pond all by himself for 2 years because he wanted to live deliberately. Freud said, most people don't live. They are merely lived by their instincts and passions. What does that mean? What is Freud advocating? He's saying live consciously, which is the same thing as Thoreau saying live deliberately. Live your life consciously. It's really, really hard to do. It's a lot harder in the beginning because eventually you get to a point where it's, you know, you got to groove it in as habit. But you're living your life consciously, aware. You're not just taking things for granted. You're not just going through the motions. You're not just doing what everybody else is doing. That's the key, is to live your life deliberately, live your life consciously, to be aware of not only the decisions that you're making, because in the final analysis, your life is a sum total of the decisions you make. It's not what you think or what you feel or what you say. It's going to be the sum total of the decisions that you make. And every single day of your life, you're making millions of decisions, most of the time, again, unconsciously. Every instant that somebody's watching this video right now, they're making a decision not to shut the video off. I'm going to watch it for one more second and one more second and one more second. And then eventually they may make a decision, I've had enough of this guy, Turak, I'm turning this thing off. That's a decision. We make a decision, every driving a car, which is a million decisions taking place there to keep the car from hitting somebody else's car. So we're always making decisions, and our lives are the sum total of our decisions. Was it Sartre or Camus? One of the great existentialists said, you know, we can make free decisions, but we can't decide to not make decisions. Even to decide not to make a decision is a decision. So you're forced to make decisions. The people who live the most meaningful lives are the ones who make the best decisions. You know, nobody's going to make 100% great decisions. But the most important thing is you have to be aware of the decisions you're making as you're making them. And then you have to analyze the results of the decisions you've made. You got a feedback. Was that a good decision? Did I make it? If it was a bad decision, why did I make it? So first of all, be conscious of your decisions and then probe as to why you made this particular decision. Why are you a particular sect of Christianity? Why are you a Methodist, for example? Well, I'm a Methodist because it's all these intellectual reasons, you know. And I never just say, I'm a Methodist because my mother was a Methodist, you know. And I'm scared of my mother, so I'm not going to do anything that my mother did. You know, you have to get down into those deep, dark levels and find out why. Or question your motivations. What are my motivations? Why am I really wanting to make this decision? And of course, and what is the enemy of the good decision? Rationalization, self-deception, making excuses. wishful thinking, illusory thinking, is illusory reasoning, all that stuff. And that gets factored in without people. Most of the time, all that stuff is factored in without people realizing it because they're not conscious. And then they make all kinds of decisions that are terrible, biased, because they don't realize why they're truly making a decision. So those are the two things. Be conscious of it and then delve into why. And be constantly asking yourself, why? Why? Why do I want to be a doctor? Why do I want to be an Indian chief? Why do I want to live in Greece? Why do I really want to live in Greece? And you have to be courageous enough to avoid rationalizations because the truth might be, I think I can get laid if I live in Greece. That's not very noble. You don't want to admit that to yourself. The only reason you're going to uproot and go all the way, leave your family and leave all your responsibilities and go all the way to Greece just so you can get laid, is that it? Is that all you are? Just an animal? You don't want to face that. But it may very well be the truth. So you got to dig down in there and be willing to face often unflattering answers. And I'd say then third, you need other people and teachers that accelerate this process. And that can be another way in which it can be painful to hear the truth about stuff, I remember one time I told my Zen teacher, Mr. Rose, I was living down there with him in West Virginia, and I said, Mr. Rose, I think I'll go up to Pittsburgh this weekend. I haven't seen my mother in a month or so now, and you don't let me make long distance calls from down here, which of course he didn't. I haven't talked to her either, and I really just think I need, jump in my van and get up there and see my parents and, check. And he said, oh, okay, great. Good idea. He said, yeah. He said, oh, and by the way, I said, what? He said, tell that girl I said hello. And then suddenly, damn, I'm not going to see my mother. I'm not going, I don't miss my mother. I want to see that chick. And I've got it all planned out in my mind that I'm going to get all the way up to Pittsburgh and I'm going to go in and I'm going to have all this wonderful thing with my mother and I'm going to feel really good about myself because I've come all the way up here to see my mother. And then it's going to occur to me, while I'm here, I might as well give Sarah a call. No, that wasn't it at all. The whole reason you're going is to see Sarah and you're throwing your mother under the bus. And Mr. Rose just did you a favor. So please don't murder him because that's exactly what you want to do right now. Because he's done it again. Because this is the 50th time this week he's done something like that to you. So anyway, that's what you need. You need other people and that accelerates things so much more quickly because you're usually so close. I mean, I remember that you can't see it. And I remember arguing with people years ago who used to say, how can you know what a woman thinks when you're not a woman, and I'd say something like that. I'd always say, hey, there's two kinds of knowledge. There's a knowledge that comes from being up close, and there's knowledge that comes from being far away. There are things about being a man or being a woman that a woman or a man's never going to understand unless they're a man or a woman. But there's other things that only a man's going to know about a woman because he's objective about it, because he's got distance, because he's got a perspective. So there's things that a woman needs to learn about being a woman that only a man can tell her. If you get too close to something, you can't see it. And if you don't get close at all, then you can't see it. So you need both the perspectives. So you need other people they can so much more clearly see. And again, I talk a lot about alcoholism. Such a classic example of so many things. You go and you look at extreme examples in order to see normality with more perspective. And it's so easy to see an alcoholic destroying himself. It's so easy to see that what he's doing. Yet it's so incredibly hard to tell him. His defense mechanisms against being told he's an alcoholic are so incredibly. People around the alcoholic see the alcoholism long before he does, in other words. If you're willing to listen, he could save himself a lot of agony. Same with all of us. If we listen to teachers, we get a community and get other people that are willing to work with us and give us their honest opinions, it can save us a lot of time. Obviously, evil things, first of all. we could throw all those. Don't pursue child molesting and murder and rape and pillage and all that stuff. So we could throw all those into the. I don't necessarily say, I don't think that money's bad. I don't think being successful in life is bad. As a matter of fact, I've often noticed that a lot of people, especially on the New Age side of the spectrum in spirituality, like to, they're proud of their failure. In other words, the fact that they can't function in life becomes a earmark of how spiritual they must be. Because the only reason they're not millionaires, being like Zuckerberg or Bill Gates, is because they're so spiritual. So that's why they're starving to death and living so that becomes an excuse. Give unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's and God's the things that are God's. I've started businesses myself, and I'm an entrepreneur, and I was a corporate executive, and I don't think there's anything wrong necessarily with those things. It goes back, why are you doing the things that you're doing? Why? If you're doing, then you're doing them for the wrong reasons. It's not the things, it's the reasons you're doing them. If you think that power is going to make you happy, then you're doing the wrong thing. Then you're chasing the wrong thing. If you think power is important because if you don't have enough physical power to start your lawnmower, you can't get your grass cut, there's nothing wrong with that kind of power. And you go to the gym and you work out a little bit so you get an arm strong enough to be able to pull the lanyard to start the lawnmower. There's nothing wrong with it. It's why you're doing it. And if you're doing it for selfish, vain, insubstantial, stupid reasons, then you're pursuing the wrong things. I also keep coming back to the fact that you should be aiming past the target. One of the big reasons I ended up in North Carolina, I was offered a job in a bar in New York City by my roommate's fraternity brother was visiting New York, and I happened to be working for a big cable company at the time, but I was back in New York, and we all went out for a beer. By the end of the night, he'd offered me a job. I knew nothing about software. I was in the cable TV business. He was in this. He had an entrepreneurial startup in Research Triangle Park here to sell software to restaurants. I knew nothing about software. I knew nothing about restaurants. I knew very little of anything about him. I knew absolutely nothing about living in the South. And like a week later, I was here. I did it on purpose. That I didn't know anything about software. That I didn't know anything about North Carolina. That I didn't know anything. That this thing that I was scared shitless. That I was going to uproot everything that I knew. Turn my back on the whole. I had my props. I was already a vice president of marketing. I was 30 years old. I was already a vice president of marketing for a $500, $600 million cable company. And I came down to work. I'd never been an entrepreneur before. I'd never worked in a startup. I guess I worked at MTV, but MTV was funded by American Express and Warner Communications to the tune of $1 billion. So it wasn't really a startup. This was a garage startup kind of thing. That's all the reasons I did it. To challenge myself, to force myself to do something that would be uncomfortable for myself. These are the reasons why I did it. And I think this is one of the things, by the way, that Mr. Rose used to emphasize. Father Francis emphasized it down at the monastery. Father Francis used to say, real, true Christianity is countercultural. If you don't feel like you're swimming upstream against the tide, against what everybody else is doing, you're most probably not doing spiritual work. Mr. Rose said, I'm going to tell you right now, the more you do spiritual work, the more trouble it's going to cause you. And one of the main ways that it causes you trouble is nobody understands what the hell you're doing and why you're doing it. I left MTV. Went to work for what's now the A&E network. And I had a wonderful boss, an Irish guy, Jim Collins, loved the guy, best boss I ever had. But one day he said to me, Augie, he says, you're doing a great job. I couldn't be happier. He said, I have no idea what all that spiritual hogwash crapola is that you're always talking about. He said, but you know what? I see it in your performance every day. Now, he was an exception to the rule because he wasn't one of these guys that everybody else was saying, you're wasting your time. And my dad never forgave me, so to speak, for quitting that great big job I had as vice president of sales and marketing for a big cable company. I had my company car. They had a company airplane. I was on a big expense account. They were gonna give me shares of their cable company. My job was secure, and I quit and went to North Carolina to work for this. And one of the reasons I didn't mind leaving is because I didn't like the way they ran the railroad. I mean, the CEO, I was very close to him, and he was a really, really good guy. But on the other hand, he had slipshod business. He didn't mind not paying people, for example. He would eventually pay them, but he would stretch people that really couldn't afford to be stretched. They'd be stretched out for 8 months when they're supposed to be paid in that 30 days and all this. They were always short of cash. So they were always cutting corners and pulling stuff that I didn't approve of. I didn't see anything illegal, but just not good, not kind of business practice I liked. And so anyway, my dad, being a Depression guy and a guy that whose my grandparents were peasants in Slovakia and came to this country with nothing, when they were 19 years old. And so he was very much security oriented. And so then he would read in the newspaper. Meanwhile, I eventually end up starting my own company and everything, and we're struggling, we're just getting to our knees, little by little, building this company. And my dad would constantly, Augie, just think where you would be if you'd just stayed with Adelphia, which was the name of the big cable company, because they eventually went public, and then the stock was going up, and then a year later, yeah, Augie, just think where you'd be if you'd stay with Adelphia, And so it was very hurtful, actually. I'd done all right, and I was building my company, and now I have to listen to my dad constantly saying that. And then in the year 2000 or 2001, they raided the company that I used to work for. They all ended up going to prison. Matter of fact, they ended up in prison here at Butner Penitentiary, which is only about 10 miles from where we're sitting right now. I used to go over there and visit them in the penitentiary, the guys I used to work for. It was a family, a father and a son. So the Wall Street Journal, front page, John Regas, Tim Regas, Mike Regas, arrested. They're being led out in handcuffs, So I took the Wall Street Journal and I took it over and I dropped it in my dad's lap and I said, well, Dad, we finally know where I'd be if I'd have stayed with Adelphia. You're going to jail with these guys. Of course, the other irony too is that our business ended up being super successful and we sold it for lots of money. But the point is, my dad is just a microcosm of the macrocosm. The vast majority of people never understood why I would take a cut in salary to do this, or why I would do commission only, or why, when I could get a big salary to do something else, or why I was doing this or that, or, a lot of times why I was quitting good jobs in order to go be a carpet installer, or drop out of college to be a carpet installer. Why? So you're always, pushing upstream. And even then you would try to explain, and after 30 minutes of trying to explain, you realized you just wasted 30 minutes of your life. They have no understanding of what you're talking about. So this is the pressure. One of the most devastating things that is the ego is alienation. Spirituality automatically alienates you. You end up a stranger in a strange land. I mean, I was always a gregarious guy. I always had lots of friends. I was never, I never had any problem with girls, but at the same token, I was always alone. Because none of these people that were around me really, I never had a single girlfriend, for example, that really cared about my spiritual side. As a matter of fact, a lot of times I had to hide a lot of it. I had one woman who broke up with me, and I said, why are you breaking up with me? She said, I'll tell you exactly why I'm breaking up with you. She said, if I was married to you, she said, I'd live my whole life waiting to wake up one morning and see a note pinned to the pillow, gone to Tibet. Always going to be swimming upstream. So to the extent that you try to live your life deliberately and you're living your life consciously and you're trying to make your life count, you have to be prepared for the fact that you're going to be spending a lot of time dealing with people who just don't understand what you're doing. Because most people, like Freud said, most people do not live. They are merely lived by their passions and instincts. They're driven. They think they're doing stuff. As Mr. Rose says, he thinks he's doing. That was Mr. Rose, one of the worst things he could say about somebody. He thinks he's doing something. when he realizes he's not doing anything, he's not doing anything, he's being done. I mean, I always like to talk about how people mistake cool. Somebody like Michael Jordan, who is cool, wears his baseball hat backwards. What you don't realize is it's Jordan's coolness that makes the baseball bat cool. It doesn't work the other way. Turning your baseball hat doesn't make you Michael Jordan. That's what everybody thinks. Somehow or another, I can just borrow Michael Jordan's coolness by wearing my baseball hat turned around backwards. So anyway, I've always had a kind of a distaste for what I consider monkey see, monkey do behaviors. Fads. In order to not waste your life, the most important thing is to live your life deliberately, to live your life consciously. I would say that Socrates was exactly right on when he said, which is another way of saying what Socrates said, which is the unexamined life is not worth living. So you're examining your life and you're living your life deliberately. Therefore, you start making good decisions rather than bad decisions. And it doesn't take many bad decisions to put you so deep in a hole that it could take you another 15 years to get back out of it. So you want to avoid making bad decisions because your life ends up being, your character and everything is an extension of all the decisions that you make in your life. So we right back to how do we avoid making bad decisions? And a lot of times, especially when we're young, we're impulsive. We just make them for all the wrong. We're emotional. We make emotional decisions. We don't think things through. That's one of my big things is you think things through. I remember years ago, I used to be so pissed off because these people would come down and I'm trying to merge onto the lane and these guys wouldn't move over so that I could get out. They stayed in my lane. And I was thinking, what these jerks, these idiots, all they got to do is move over and be courteous and move over so that I can get out here, And then eventually one day I realized there was an exit up there and they had to be in that lane to take the exit that was beyond my entrance. I wasn't thinking things through. I used to wonder why women got so upset about whether the toilet seat was up or down. What makes them think they own the toilet seat? That it's got to be down for them rather than up, And I was bitching about it one day, and this girl just looks at me but we fall in. I thought, you didn't think it through. Of course, the toilet seat's got the default mode should be down, They fall in. I never thought of that. They fall in. So these are trivial examples of just not thinking things through. So we have a tendency to not think things through. We have a tendency to be susceptible to very facile arguments. Something that sounds like, for example, marriage is just a piece of paper. I could go on for another hour about why that's ridiculous. But I bet I've heard 1 million people say it. Or religions are bad because religions start wars. It's the most ridiculous, it's the stupid. Both of those are examples of people, something sounds good on the front end, but if you thought it through for a second, you would realize, you realize why it's bogus. So we don't think things through. And then we make judgments about that. We may make judgments to hate everybody that's a religion or something like that. So the point is, when you have a community and you have other people, there's a reason why people come together to build businesses and people come together because you need all the different perspectives. It's amazing to me. I go to a personal trainer every day. I've been going to the guy for like 15 years. And every single day he corrects me. Not just once, probably 10 times. Because my form has gone bad, because I'm not doing the exercise correctly. My golf pro, I used to have a golf pro, and he was constantly adjusting my swing, because, and I didn't know it. I can't feel it. I didn't feel it myself when I was making the mistakes today. I think I'm trying my hardest when I'm working out. But he's there to correct me. And then we have all these examples. And then when we take the most important thing in our lives, which is our spiritual life, our character development, because character is who we are, we want to do that alone. Not only we want to do it alone, we insist on doing it alone. And I think one of the big, laziness is one reason, or lack of ability to see the urgency is another reason. We just don't see the same urgency. When you look because we're all practical, we're all rooted to the earth. So you look in the mirror and you see a fat slob. It's really easy to see that you need to get to the gym, or you need it, whatever. Or or you look down at your foot and it's all swollen up. I better get to the doctors. But with our spiritual life, it's not as clear to us that we need the help. But it's also, which is part of human nature as well, is we don't want accountability. We don't want to be held accountable. My personal trainer has gone through a lot of people that just, one woman said, I'll do anything you ask me to do, just don't make me sweat. And he said, well, go find another personal trainer. And she didn't want accountability. She don't want to be held accountable. So we're always looking for ways. We use ambiguity. I'm going to try. We'll see. Are you going to come will you be to the meeting today? We'll see. I'll see. I am going to try, So how come you weren't at the meeting? Why didn't you said I was going to be there? Even in our relationships, we're friends with benefits. We're not really a couple, but we're really kind of, everybody is trying, they say that young people today don't even make appointments. They just kind of head out on a Friday night and start texting. And they all kind of end up at different places. But nobody can ever be said, how come you weren't there? Because there's no appointment. Maybe I just said, I'm just headed out, So there's all this, everybody's looking for all this ambiguity. This is one of the reasons why we don't want to put ourselves in a community. That's why we don't want to have teachers. Because that's exactly what they're supposed to do, is put our feet to the fire. And we don't want to have that. I think that's one of the great, big, bad reasons why so many people gravitate to New Age spirituality. Because there's no judgments. There's no accountability. Everything goes. Everybody's on their own path. Everybody's got their own truth. Who are you to say that they're wasting their life? That they're pursuing the wrong things? That their spiritual path is not valid? They don't want to hear it. So they concoct a whole worldview. Of course, it doesn't hold any water. I got into an argument on LinkedIn many, many years ago with a guy who was pushing all that stuff, that everybody's got their own path and all spiritual paths are valid and who's to say, blah, 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 blah. And he was going on and on and on. And so I just wrote, I said, let's say you found out that your next door neighbor had his own spiritual path, and his own spiritual path involved sacrificing his own son to God on Friday night. I said, are you going to call the cops? And he comes back. And I just wrote back, are you going to call the cops? And he writes me this 3 paragraphs. And I said, are you going to call the cops? And the third, he just wrote, yes. So I guess all spiritual paths are valid, Were the Aztecs valid with all their human sacrifice? Was that just their spiritual path? Who am I to say? So we need other people around us that are going to straighten us out. They're going to give us the straight poop, because that saves us so much time if we're open to it. It's the equivalent of being, can you take constructive criticism? And most people can't. The other thing that I found out, because I worked in these groups for years and years, Mr. Rose called it your chief feature. He used to say there was a thing called your chief feature. Your chief feature was make your fundamental the thing that was holding you back. He called that your chief feature. And my best way of describing what a chief feature would be, think of the guy, and the chief feature is also the blind spot. Supposedly, except the retina, the very center of the retina of the eye is blind, or something like that. And this is we can't see the chief feature. This thing is so identified. We're so close to it that that it's the chief feature is the thing that we don't see. And this is what we're defending about. Most of our defenses, our psychological and emotional defenses, are dedicated to protecting the chief feature. And so it's like the guy who goes to the psychiatrist and he says, "Oh, my life is a disaster. I'm depressed all the time. I'm drinking way too much. I'm fighting all these demons and I don't know what they are. And you just really got to help me, doc. And I'll do whatever you ask me to do. But please, we can't talk about my mother." That's his chief feature then. He's just giving it away. But immediately he's taking that off the table. It's the alcoholic who's willing to do anything but don't ask me to stick drinking. That's his chief feature. And you'll find that if people are defensive and you try to point out to them that they're defensive, what happens? They get defensive. If their biggest problem is they can't take criticism, and you give them the criticism that your biggest problem is you can't take criticism, they don't take the criticism. It's really hard to get people to see the chief feature because pointing out the chief feature usually triggers the chief feature. So you're right back where you started. So you got to come at it with more of an oblique kind of thing. Or one of the things that's kind of like with alcoholics, you need an intervention. So if you have a group of people and all 10 people in the group tell you you're an asshole, it has a much better chance of registering. I'm talking myself hoarse, literally and figuratively, because I can't emphasize enough. And I understand where other people are at. When Mr. Rose first told me that the very first thing I had to do when I asked him to be my teacher, and I was expecting so many other things, so many more important things. The very first thing he said, first thing you've got to do on a spiritual path is get yourself a group. And I remember everything deflated. It sounded so banal. So, just na, 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 na. Oh man, a group, And it was the most wonderful advice. And thank God I took it. Thank God I went back to the University of Pittsburgh and created a group and kept doing it and doing it and doing it all my life. As important as it is and as valuable as it is to be in a community or in a group, it's 100 times more valuable if you're the leader of that group. You get so much more out of it if you're the one that's investing in it. The more you invest in it, the more it's like anything. The more you invest in your golf lessons, the faster you're going to get improved. The more you invest. And the person who invests the most, because I'm not going to kid anybody, holding a spiritual group together is one of the most, maybe the most challenging things I ever did. Because it isn't about money and it isn't about influencing friends and making friends and influencing people. It isn't about, it's the easiest thing for people to rationalize and I'm going to skip this week. I'm not going to go. And, and you're not paying them to be there. And they're not paying you. It's one of the things I go back and forth in my mind about. In America, it's almost if you're going to start a group, you got to charge them through the nose. Because Americans don't value anything that they don't pay through the nose for. We all say we love, it's spiritual, it should be free, it's charity, peace, compassion, sharing, nice, selflessness, me too, selflessness. And as soon as somebody offers us something selflessly, we piss on it. If you're not paying for it, it can't be worth something. And I saw that happen to Mr. Rose so much. It was so infuriating. Because he was such a spiritual giant, but he refused to ever ask anybody for any money or any real investment. And so people used to take him completely for granted, come into his house and say, "Hey, can you make me a cheese sandwich?" So Dave Gold and I used to see that happen with the college students a lot we were working with. They would talk to us in ways they would never talk to their history professor. Why? Because they're paying through the freaking nose for that history professor. And Dave and I would be doing the work with them on a volunteer basis. Please help us out. Share. If this is doing anything for you, and even if it's not, please share this video, like it, pass it on to somebody else. I actually had a telephone call from somebody the other day to thank me, and he asked me, "How can I help you?" And I said, "Just pass it on. Pass on what the work we're trying to do to somebody else so it might help someone else. Thank you very much and hope to see you next time."